Shock Jock Howard Stern is not going to release the Trump interviews that he's had over the years. On his SiriusXM show earlier this week, he announced that he will not be releasing his interview archives featuring Donald Trump. Now, he talked to the Washington Post, and look, Howard Stern, he's a Democrat. He's supporting Hillary Clinton. However, he also considers Donald Trump a personal friend. And he told the Washington Post that it would essentially be a betrayal to Trump if he turned over the interviews to be used as ammunition for the Clinton campaign. He said, quote, "Why don't I play all the tapes? I have to tell you why. I feel Donald Trump did the show in an effort to be entertaining and have fun with us, and I feel like it would be a betrayal to any of our guests if I sat there and played them now, especially when people are attacking him. Not to mention, these interviews were done in full public view. Quote, these conversations that I had with Donald Trump weren't done in private like the Billy Bush tapes. This was on the radio. This was live. Anybody could hear it. Now, you also said that it would be too easy and simplistic to replay these past interviews because they weren't conducted to pretty much screw anybody over. Quote, we were having a good time. I fully knew what I was doing when I interviewed Trump. I knew I had a guy on who loved to talk about sex. I had a guy who loved to evaluate women on a scale of 1 to 10. These are avenues I went down because I knew it would entertain the audience. Now, I'm kind of mixed on this. And my guest is as well. So, Ron, let's start with you. Why are you kind of mixed on this? What do you think?
Well, kind of what Howard was saying. I mean, Howard Stern's been around a long, long time and is on a very huge platform. But I know for me, even on my show, whether it be whether it be on YouTube or whether it be the podcast / radio show, any guest, I really do consider like a guest in my home. And I've had a lot of guests that I don't agree with, and I'm totally willing to disagree with them. We will disagree, but I still respect them as a guest. I don't appreciate them being trolled in a way that's not necessary, even if I disagree with them. I still in many ways consider them a guest in my home. I want them to have a positive experience coming on my show. And I would never want to have that content be used to incriminate them unless it was a very particular exception. And I mean, in this case, if he said something that could potentially be used as evidence, say some of these women take him to court, and it's like, well, he said something on the Howard Stern show that hinted to this, and this is worthwhile evidence. I think in that case, if I was Howard Stern, I'd kind of be like, well, gee, I mean, if this guy is guilty of a crime that is punishable, and I guess I would turn this over to cooperate. But if it's just him saying stuff when he was not running for anything, and he was just in many ways, Donald Trump was a real estate shock jock, a reality TV real estate shock jock himself, and he's on the Howard Stern show. I mean, I can kind of understand, strictly from putting convictions aside and just saying, as a show host who creates this body of work, or whatever you want to call it, body of content, I have ethical problems with just releasing this just to release it in a political campaign.
Right. Let me kind of play devil's advocate for a minute here. So, look, I think it's pretty obvious, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of bad reporting on this, right? Because a lot of the stuff that he says, or he had said in these interviews, can be put into a bad light. Now, I'm thinking that if it were any other person, you could probably let this go. However, you've got some of this reality that is based, on his past. His recent, his old sexual assault lawsuit that he had settled, his comments with Billy Bush, and of course you have this rather large stable of accusers. Now, if this guy didn't have this history of actually allegedly doing this stuff and acting out in very pervy ways, maybe this wouldn't be an issue. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And I keep saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Put everything that we know together, and what he says on these interviews might actually start to matter. And so there's sort of the argument of saying, well, look, they don't have to release it, but this is kind of important. And so you would want him to, take a look at these statements in the past and look at them with a critical eye and see if there's like, you can establish a pattern of him saying and doing these types of things and bragging about these types of things. So there's.
But could it be any more revealing than what he said to Billy Bush when he didn't realize anyone in the public would hear that? On the Howard Stern show, he knew he was on the air. He knew he was on the show. He also knew what show he was on. You're on the Howard Stern show.
Right.
They expect you to talk about sex. They expect you to be a bit unorthodox about it. That's what that show is. Sure. I mean, if I was doing the Howard Stern show and was doing a stand-up set or whatever, like sitting in studio, I don't have any I don't have any real graphic stuff. That's just not a style that works for me or whatever. But I'd probably choose accordingly and do my stuff that's a little more risque in that department, because I would want it to be well received, and I would try to do some political stuff too, because there's that political edge to the show. There always has been, at least. Well, I guess I haven't listened in years, but when I used to listen, there was. But I just don't see how that would be any more telling than the stuff that's already out there. And then, this is an appearance on the Howard Stern show,
right? And let me add that, look, this is somebody who's trying to be entertaining on a show that talks about sex. So what are you going to do? You're going to talk about sex, right?
Right, yeah, and he was in a different place then too. He wasn't running for office. He was a real estate, and I like that term, man. I mean, he was a reality TV shock jock real estate guy. That's what he was. And unfortunately, that's the person running for president. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we learn a lesson that maybe people like that shouldn't be able to, or well, I guess they should be able to, that's democracy, but we should try to make sure they don't get to this point.
Yeah, I think I'm less conflicted about this than I was, originally reading this article. I think that we could do without the old interviews. I think there's more than enough that's came out about him that, show what he actually does think, his interview or his comments with Billy Bush, that we don't need to look at this, right? We've got other stuff that's actually important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Howard Stern, I'm going to give Donald Trump a pass. And you know what helps me do that pass? There was one more thing that he talked about, and Howard Stern talked about the locker room talk. He said, quote, "But this idea of locker room talk, all the times I've been around guys, and believe me, when I'm around guys, 85% of the time, you're talking about pussy. But I've never been in the room when someone has said, grab them by the pussy. No one's ever advocated going that step where you get a little bit, hey, I'm going to invade somebody's space. A lot of locker room banter is real kind of desperate talk. The reason it's in a locker room is because no one's proud of it." So, I mean, that right there kind of nails it on the head, I think.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget Howard Stern has daughters. Those daughters, at least what you saw in the press back in the day, and again, I mean, I haven't listened to him in over 10 years, but they weren't allowed to listen to his show.
Makes sense.
He would not let his daughters listen to his show. I mean, I think this is a guy, and I think pretty much most men, I think, applying community standards are going to say, yeah, I mean, sure, we'll talk a little bit unorthodox in the locker room or whatever, but not like that. Not where we're grabbing her in the pussy and it was unwanted and unwarranted. That's, I mean, I've never heard talk like that before in any locker room.
Yeah.
Not that I was ever an athlete, but.
Well, I was never an athlete, but I remember the locker room and gym class. That's about the best that I could get. And, even them, high school gym class, bunch of teenagers, we didn't talk like that. Not like grab her in the pussy, like, hey, I'd like to date her, I'd like to do her, she's pretty hot. But no, I'm just gonna grab her outright and do what I want.
Right.
No, that's not locker room talk. That's not talk that I've heard. You know, like saying to a woman, "Hey, I'd like to fuck that girl." You know, that's fine. That's fine. That's locker room talk. That's actual locker room talk. But this talk of, "Hey, let's you know, go into somebody's personal space unsolicited," is just no. It's no. Not in not in my locker room. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent, non-corporate media, go to our Patreon page and become a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation.